Ah, it is good to see you. I was unaware that this odd contraption was already recording my moving pictures and sound. Um, well, a friend of mine by the name of Mr. H.G. Wells wrote his book about the time machine based on a contraption he himself built some 10 odd years or so before he wrote the story. And Mr. Wells approached me in the autumn years of my life, and autumn years I still enjoy by gad, and took me in one of these time machines so that I may see how we would be in the future, how Great Britain would be in the future. Yes. And around the same time that I began going in this time machine, I was reading a story. Oh, it was a few years after I started going about in this machine. I'd read a story by Mr. Jerome K. Jerome, Three Men in a Boat. And in this story, Mr. Jerome says, will it be the same in the future? Will the prized treasures of today always be the cheap trifles of the day before? Will rows of our willow pattern dinner plates be ranged above the chimney pieces of the great in the years 2000 and odd? Will the white cups with the gold rim and the beautiful gold flower inside, species unknown, that our Sarah Janes now break in sheer light-heartedness of spirit, be carefully mended, and stood upon a bracelet, and dusted only by the lady of the house? That china dog that ornaments the bedroom of my furnished lodgings, it is a white dog, its eyes blue, its nose is a delicate red with spots, its head is painfully erect, its expression is amiability carried to verge of imbecility. I do not admire it myself. Considered as a work of art, I may say it irritates me. Thoughtless friends jeer at it, and even my landlady herself has no admiration for it, and excuses its presence by the circumstance that her aunt gave it to her. About in 200 years' time, it is more than probable that the dog will be dug up from somewhere or other, minus its legs and with its tail broken, and will be sold for old china and put in a glass cabinet, and people will pass it around and admire it. They will be struck by the wonderful depth of the colour on the nose, and speculate as to how beautiful the bit of the tail that is lost no doubt was. We in this age do not see the beauty of that dog. We are too familiar with it. It is like the sunset and the stars. We are not awed by their loveliness, because they are common to our eyes. So it is with that china dog. In 2,288 people will gush over it. The making of such dogs will have become a lost art. Our descendants will wonder how we did it, and say how clever we were. We shall be referred to lovingly as those grand old artists that flourished in the 19th century and produced those china dogs. The sampler that the eldest daughter did at school will be spoken of as a tapestry of the Victorian era, and be almost priceless. The blue and white mugs of the present-day roadside inn will be hunted up and all cracked and chipped and sold for their weight in gold, and rich people will use them for claret cups and travellers from Japan will buy up all the presents from Ramsgate and souvenirs of Margate that may have escaped destruction and take them back to Jito as ancient English curious. Ah, well, I have seen the future. I have seen what Mr. Jerome has predicted. And while it is true that the objects of our era have been reified to the point where the trifles of today have become, the treasures of today were the trifles of yesteryear, the trifles of my times. I have also noticed that in tandem with this great reification of pointless objects, we Victorians ourselves do not get the same treatment. No, indeed, a stereotype has emerged of my contemporaries, the people who I knew in my time, yes, it's a really harmful thing, the way that we are seen as one monolithic mass who all thought the same way, looked out at the world with the same attitudes. And this is why, using the future technologies that I have acquired in my travels through time, I have decided to set the record straight in a series of, as you would call them, videos, yes. And in setting the record straight, the main point that I wish to bring to you is that your future historians, literary critics, psychoanalysts, and others who earn their bread and butter by writing about my times, like to write about this group of people known as the Victorians. And this group of people has seems to somehow think identically. And it's very interesting that these people, anybody really who lived in Britain or in the Empire, for the 63 years that one of our monarchs, Victoria, was in power, even if we lived part of our lives during this period or all of our lives, no matter what, we are all lumped in together. For starters, those who lived in the 1840s or saw the prime of their life in the 1840s and 50s may indeed have a very different recollection than those who lived in and had the prime of their lives, that is to say, in the 1880s or 90s. As an old man, I have seen many different people from different parts of the country who spoke with different dialects, women, men, children, people, some of whom died in the 1850s, some of whom died in the 1880s, some of whom may indeed live past the time that Her Majesty the Queen herself had to perish in 1901. And I know this because of my future travels, and I was somewhat curious. Now, you know, there are some of us who live in these days who would object to being called Victorian in the first place. I am sure that many of my friends who are, well, I would disagree with them, but who favour republicanism, many of these friends of mine who do not want a crown monarch would certainly object to being named and periodized as living under their queen, and known for the queen they lived under, if indeed they don't even want a queen to be living under. Yes, and I'm going to make this series of videos about the different Victorians, because I say, if you must periodizers, if you must all lump us together, which is itself possibly a mistake in terms of 63 years, you'll see very different conditions at the beginning and at the end, but if you must lump us together in time, acknowledging that some of us lived in city dwellings, some of us lived in the country, some of us lived in the northeast, some of us lived in the southwest, some of us lived in London, some in Birmingham, some in Manchester, some in Edinburgh. Indeed, some grew up away from Britain as subjects of the Empire, and some as subjects who had no British blood and who were subjected to the rule of the Union Jack, and others, such as Mr. Rudyard Kipling, who were indeed born in India to British parents. And in such different conditions, in such different years, in such different backgrounds, in such different classes, from the upper to the upper middle, to the working orders, and so on and so forth, and the underworld, you had different points of view on a whole range of issues. And this is what I will be pointing out in this series of videos. I will be going over many of the hot-button issues of my time: empire, race, gender, class, the workings of the emerging industrial capitalist system, and indeed the preservation of the old order as it gives way to quite new ideas and new technologies. And indeed, I will also cover some of the different attitudes to technology, some of the different attitudes to religion, and a whole range of things. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but also sex, because as I've noticed, we've all been painted as a lot of prudes, either undersexed prudes or oversexed consorters with prostitutes. And I shall show you that this is not the only thing. So we shall see through this series of videos, using your 21st century technologies, which are a marvel indeed, that we of my day were not all the same. And if you hear somebody referring to this monolithic group, you must first always ask, which amongst them? Aye, forsooth. And until next time, I bid you farewell. Thank you. Oh, by the way, you should really try the tobacco from Harley Street. It's very good. And I suspect it will continue to be 120 years after. Aye. Thank you for listening.